Let's start off with the quiz. Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Eric Clapton, Van Halen. Okay, which one of these artists doesn't belong on this list? You may be thinking it's Eric Clapton. He's the only solo artist. The rest of them are all bands. Or maybe you're thinking it's Van Halen. Their heyday was in the 80s. The rest of these artists a decade or two before. Good guesses. The real outlier in this list, actually, is the Beatles. The rest of these artists are all tied together by one person, a man named Andy Johns. Andy Johns was a recording engineer. His job was to get the sound that the musicians were making in the studio on tape. It requires a real technical expertise. You have to understand all sorts of microphones and complex equipment, married with the real creative gift for knowing how to capture that sound, to get the magic on tape. And you can tell by the list of artists, Andy Johns was one of the best in the business. Not only did he work with these artists, but he recorded some of their most important albums: Led Zeppelin 4, Houses of the Holy, Rolling Stones classics like Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. Andy Johns' personal stamp is on music that millions and millions of people around the world for decades have been listening to. Cultural touchstones of a generation. And yet Andy Johns is all but unknown. This isn't unusual. We all do invisible work at different times in different situations. What is surprising, however, is that Andy Johns, unlike most of us, was fine being invisible. In fact, he reveled in his behind-the-scenes role. And this runs completely counter to the cultural ethos today, where attention seems to be valued above nearly everything else. People willing to humiliate themselves to get on a reality TV show. Seemingly all of us spending so much time online, we're always hoping to gain ever more likes for our post and ever more followers. To get ahead in business, we're told that you need to raise your profile or have a platform. The message seems to be the more attention we get for ourselves and for our work, the better off we're going to be. And yet it never seems to be quite enough. We always want that new hit. You're only as happy as that last post that got a lot of attention. You always want the next one. It's kind of like a drug addict, always trying to fill that hole, but it never gets full. We are in an age of relentless self-promotion. And we are all in an arms race with each other, vying for attention with the expectation that it's going to make things better. But what if this is a vast myth? What if, in order to find deep, lasting satisfaction and to succeed, what if that has nothing to do with gaining attention? I used to work as a magazine fact checker. It was long hours, very tedious work at times. And I realized something while I was working at the job. The better I did my job, the more I disappeared. In fact, it was only if I made a mistake that I was noticed at all. When's the last time you've read a great magazine article and thought to yourself, man, that was fact-checked beautifully? Never. The better I did my job, the more I disappeared. In fact, if I did my job perfectly, I was invisible. And this is essentially the opposite of how most of us operate. Most of us, the better we do our jobs, the more we're recognized. And yet, late at night, sometimes after a long day at work, I felt a deep sense of reward and satisfaction that I never felt when I was working at various day jobs, surfing the web half the day. How strange to feel rewarded even though no one knew I was doing a good job. And I began to wonder, are there other jobs like this? Are there other professions that share the same inverse relationship between work and recognition? I found there are many. I traveled around the States, to Europe, to Asia, to talk with these invisibles, highly skilled professionals whose work is critical to whatever endeavor they're a part of, yet who go largely unnoticed by the public. People like a structural engineer on skyscrapers, a guitar tech for a world-famous rock band, an elite interpreter at the United Nations. All of these people shared this same inverse relationship with work and recognition. The better they do their job, the more they disappear. And yet they too were really satisfied. I found they all share 3 traits. They are ambivalent toward recognition. They simply don't seek attention the way most of us do. They're meticulous, and they savor responsibility. And I talk with scholars in business and psychology and sociology and philosophy, and I found that these 3 traits tend to have a really strong correlation both with success and with lasting satisfaction and fulfillment. But how can that be? How can it be in a culture where we're told to matter, to exist even, that you must be seen? Yet these people, invisibles, are some of the most satisfied among us. And how can it be in a culture of the branded self, where we CC our bosses on emails that tout our accomplishments, where we tell our successes to our clients and our customers? How can it be that these people, consummate professionals, often quiet and unassuming, how did they get to the tops of their fields, often in charge of vast teams of workers, highly paid? How did they get there without promoting themselves? How can this be? I spent nearly 2 years meeting with these invisibles and talking with scholars to try to get an answer to that question. Dennis Poon is a structural engineer on skyscrapers, and not just any structural engineer. He's helped build many of the tallest buildings in the world today. Dennis's calculations affect whether these buildings stand or fall. They affect the design of these buildings. He's in charge of vast teams of workers, and these buildings cost billions of dollars to create, and they are icons on skylines, not just civic, but even national pride. And I asked Dennis, how do you handle all this responsibility? How do you handle the pressure of having all this responsibility on your shoulders? And he said, it's an honor. Dennis Poon revels in his behind-the-scenes role. Now, the Frank Lloyd Wrights and the Frank Garys of the world, they're going to gain all of the attention. But without Dennis Poon and the structural engineers like him, these Starkitects buildings would never stand. Dennis Poon knows something, that the value of his work is what was bringing him satisfaction. He didn't care about being seen. He doesn't want his name in lights. Pete Clements has been the guitar technician for Radiohead for the past 20 years, one of the most widely beloved and respected bands around the world. Radiohead, when you're at that level of success and celebrity, it is a vast, complex machine to keep a band like that moving around the world and in and out of the studio. There is a vast amount of equipment and logistics involved. And Pete Clements' job is to be in charge of the band's most precious assets, their personal equipment. How does he manage all this in such this complex and high-pressure situation? He has a system. On the front of every flight case that travels in 18 different trucks as they tour around the world, he's put special color-coded symbols so they know where to move the trucks. He's created complex schematics for each one of these cases, how to pack and unpack every single case night after night at sold-out concerts and arenas around the world. Just before showtime, he's handed a set list, and next to every single track on that set list, he creates a complex code that lets him know which one of Tom York's 12 guitars are going to be used on that particular track, which one or which combination of effects pedals are going to be used, turned on, turned off, and in what way, and how to turn the amplifier, all the different knobs in which direction. This is how you become the guitar tech for Radiohead, by being meticulous. And yet, of course, Pete Clements remains in the shadows. He's literally in the dark on stage right. And if everything goes well, if there's a little bit of luck on his side and everything goes perfectly, he'll remain there in the shadows. The fans at the concert, they will never think of him, and that's exactly the way he wants it to be, invisible. Let's return for a minute to Andy Johns. Imagine it's 1969, 1970. you're in the south of France recording with the Rolling Stones. It's late one night, and apparently Mick Jagger makes an opaque offer to him to join the band, replacing Bill Wyman on bass. And Andy Johns turns him down. Just imagine this for a moment. You're a red-blooded male. It's the Rolling Stones at the peak of their celebrity, the power, the wealth, the fame that would come with that, and turning down an offer to be in the band. But Andy Johns knew something even at a young age, that the value of your work, not the volume of your praise, is what's going to bring you lasting reward. Andy Johns simply wanted to do his work behind the scenes. He didn't care about becoming famous. Now, I think we all sense this on an intuitive level. And you can look at the major tenets of religion and philosophy over the millennia, even modern psychology in areas such as self-determination theory, where evidence shows that intrinsic rewards offer a far and deeper lasting value than extrinsic rewards, things like money and attention, ever do. You can look to the business world, where there's a tremendous amount of research that shows that when you focus on the product and the process rather than on promotion, that leads to the greatest results, to the most success. The evidence seems to show that doing good work does get noticed in the end. And yet, again, I think we all sort of sense this on an intuitive level, but this message is really lost in our culture of noise. We're all a bit like that annoying kid in the front of the class, desperately waving his hand, vying for the teacher's attention. Listen, recognition is great sometimes. I'm thrilled to have the name on the cover of my books. And the Invisibles are not against making money. They're not against ambition. In fact, quite the contrary, as I've noted. They're incredibly successful. Not against recognition. It's really, in the end, not about whether you're seen or unseen. It's about what motivates you. The Invisibles know that an intrinsic motivation is really what's going to bring the best reward in the end. And you can think about this notion whether it doesn't even matter whether you're seen or not. Even the most famous people among us can embody these invisible traits. The Invisibles are not an exclusive group. They're simply at a far end of a spectrum that we all fall upon. And by witnessing their heights of success and achievement and satisfaction, we can all find the honor in being a little more invisible. Thank you.